We are astounded by how quickly and mercilessly this government is moving to put people out of work and cut the services Canadians across the country rely on.
Lots of questions today as thousands of federal government workers receive notice their jobs are affected by deep spending cuts. The government is slashing, as they say, $5.2 billion over the next 3 years. They say they'll balance the books. Today, the ministries like Parks Canada, Aboriginal Affairs and Statistics Canada really got hit hard today. They took a hard hit, and we've seen the statistics. Is the government finding waste and efficiencies, as they've talked about, or are they gutting important programs that will affect services you may depend on? Joining me now, Larry Rousseau, who's the Regional Executive Vice President of the National Capital Region for the Public Service Alliance of Canada. And we'll get a perspective from Larry Rousseau. Mr. Rousseau, Stockwell Day was just on the firing line, and one of the things he said is, if you want to know details about these cuts, it's all available. Read the budgets. Now, I've read the budget, and we know the amount that will be cut. We know the agencies that will be affected. We even know how many people it will affect. But is he right to say that all the details are available?
It's easy to say read the budget. We've all read the budget. We've all read the budget. Everybody has. And we do not have the details. We do not know what frontline services are actually going to be cut at the end of the day. That's what we want to know. That's what we don't know now.
So give us an example. So for example, let's take Parks Canada today. Lots of people affected at Parks Canada. What don't you know?
Okay, we don't know, even with all the letters that went out, exactly who's going to be cut at the end of the day. You've got 1,600 notices that went out. 638 employees will be cut. Which ones? What does that mean for example, La Mauricie Park? What does it mean here on the canal? We also know, by the way, that the canal is going to have a shorter season, and all the staff there are going to be working shorter hours.
So this is the Rideau Canal?
The Rideau Canal, right here in Ottawa, is going to have a shorter season, and the staff are going to be working shorter hours. What does that mean for the visitors? Not only for the boaters that are going through, but the tourists who are going through. Stop. Ask a guard, ask someone working, a parks warden, what's going on, what is this all about, etc. These are services that Canadians expect.
What about, I mean, there'll be lots of places, historic sites like Louisbourg.
Absolutely.
So what happens there? What don't we know about the impact of these cuts yet?
What we don't know is, as I said, who at the end of the day. I think Canadians are starting to equate that people who you cut means services that are getting cut. So people are starting to make that equation now. Before,
what the government will say, just to interrupt you, they'll say it's efficiencies, there's duplication of service, there's a lot of people retiring, and so there'll be minimal effect.
Your previous guests were talking about that. We have cut. We have found the efficiencies. We are a lean operation. We are one of the world's best public services. Even Mr. Day will admit to that. Even Mr. Poiliev the other day mentioned that, the finest public service. But we are on the way to now losing that because we are beyond the capacity to deliver those services.
But they argue that there's a big deficit, and they argue over the last 3 years they increased the size of the service by 25 to 35%. So they're cutting now, as they said they would do.
Why is there a deficit, Evan? There's a deficit because it was created by this Conservative government. You reduce the revenues coming in, of course you're going to create a deficit. But don't reduce the revenues coming in, create a deficit, and say the way to correct that is to cut jobs. This is not a jobs budget.
I mean, you know, for them, they will say there's a huge recession. They had to have a huge stimulus where they spent. They said they followed both fiscal and monetary policy on that, and now they've got to correct, as countries around the world are doing, and there's a price to be paid for that. What's your answer to that?
My answer to that is that there were other places where they could have found the monies that they needed. What we have is services that Canadians need. We have the second largest country in the world, maritime, the coasts. You know, we have a border that we have to protect, nevertheless. Why are we cutting back on these services that Canadians need?
You know, the government will say, and they've said it, that these are union leaders like yourself that are basically trying to protect their jobs. That's what you're out for, and it's not about the greater good. What's the response to that?
We protect the jobs of our members. If I am the Regional Executive Vice President of the PSAC, I am there to defend my members' interests, and those interests are inextricably linked to the services that Canadians are receiving. That's what we're upset about.
Let's talk about the services. We've talked about Parks Canada. Lots of agencies, Stats Can, There's some reports that border services and or marine security or airport security will be affected. How do Canadians, trust that the unions are saying, your safety's at risk, and the government said we would never risk your safety? How do Canadians measure that? Because those are anxiety-inducing words.
Well, when the stuff starts hitting the fan, you only need one scandal.
What does that mean? What does that mean when the stuff starts hitting the fan?
Talk about, aeronautical safety, for example. Inspections. Talk about food inspections. We have inspectors out there who do a crucial, critical task. What happens when one person has to die from listeriosis who didn't have to? Why? Because you weren't out there inspecting. Look, it's a disaster waiting to happen. They are setting it up so that something is going to happen. That's what we're afraid of.
My concern is, again, a disaster waiting to happen. Yep. Someone may die. Those are pretty hot words. You're saying these cuts could risk lives.
Absolutely. We've been saying that for the past several months, and now with the cuts that we're seeing so far, that's our job. We know what's going on the ground, Evan. We know what the problems are going to be. That's what our job is.
All right. Responding to when Stockwell Day was saying that it's all transparent, Larry Rousseau, the PSAC Regional Executive Vice President of the National Capital Region, painting a very different picture. So you're seeing these pictures being painted on all sides here. Thanks so much, Mr. Rousseau.
Thank you.
Coming up next on Power and Politics, the campaigning has begun in the U.S. Rosemary Barton checks in with a new message